Rounding and why do we do it? What is rounding and why do we do it? Noah Clausing, what is rounding and why? Alright, exactly. Making it maybe a easier number to understand, but why do we do that? Okay, that's part of it there. Rounding is when close is good enough. When close is good enough. For example, you know, if somebody asked how many kids were in our school, they probably really don't care that they're 217. You know, if you were rounding that, you would just say we have about 200 kids. That's not going to change their opinion of the school. It's getting close enough. Your grade point averages are rounded. For example, rarely do you see whoever, does anybody put percentages on your paper?
Yeah.
Mrs. Stone won't put on your paper 95.2%. She'll say it's just a 95% because that 0.2% to you doesn't really mean anything. You know, it's okay to round that. So when you round a number, okay, the first thing you have to look for is what are you rounding to? That's what you have to look for first. What are you rounding to? Okay, let's say I have the number, see how high we go here, 783. Let's look at that number there. I'm going to go over it a couple times because it's an important number right now. 7, 8. This doesn't look like a brush to me. Is it a brush? Shows it's supposed to be a brush, but it doesn't look a brush. Okay, if I asked you to round this number to the nearest 10, okay, if you're rounding to the nearest 10, okay, you're limiting the choices that you can have to the numbers that if you were counting by 10, this would be. For example, 783. Looking at what number's in the tens place, because that's a good place to start. What number's in the tens place?
8.
The 8 is, 7's in the hundreds place. So if you think about this on a number line, okay, counting by tens, you would end up with either 780 or 790. Because that's, if you were counting by tens and you kept going forever and ever and ever, you'd get the 780 and 790. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, 150, so on and so on until you get to that point there. So when you round to the nearest 10, you have to figure out which of these two numbers is it going to be closer to if you put it on that number line. Well, 783, halfway between those two is what number? 780, what? 5. So 783 has to be smaller than that over here. So what is it closer to, the 780 or the 790? In which case, Amy Bollinger says, rounded to the nearest 10, 783 is 780. Please note, okay, you never, ever, ever round it down to the next lower number. In other words, when I have 783, I will never round it down to 770. It's either going to be 780 or 790. You never take one away from this number. Sometimes you add one if it gets closer, but you never take it away. Okay? Now, looking at that same number, what if I asked you to round that to the nearest 100? Round to the nearest 100. Now, this time, I'm changing what I can be close to, and I'm looking at the hundreds place. And in the hundreds place is a 7. So when I round to the nearest 100, I know my answer has to be either between, if I'm counting by 100, it either has to be 700 or the next 100 would be 800. And I'm trying to figure out which 100 is it closer to. Is it closer to 700 or is it closer to 800? Well, 783, right here in the middle is 750. 783 here, 775. 783 is going to be right about here if you're putting it on the number line. Which is it closer to, the 700 or the 800, Alex?
800.
It is, and in that case, boom, it's closer to the 800. Now, can you give me kind of a general rule to follow, how you know whether you round it to the next one or it stays the same? Because there is, rather than thinking of a number line all the time, you can kind of think about it in what way. Grace?
Well, if it's like 5 or higher than that, you round to the highest one. If it's 4 or more, then
And that is exactly it. The first time when I rounded to a 10, I always look at the number next to the 10. And if that number next to the 10 is 5 or bigger, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, I'm gonna add one to this, and this would have been 7. This would have been 790. But since this was 4 or less, 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, you keep this the same, and it ends up being 780. Same thing here. In this case, when I round to the nearest 100, here's my number in the hundreds place. What number is the important one to look at? The one next to the one you're rounding, because that's the one that tells you if that becomes an 8 or stays a 7. Since this was 5 or bigger, I add one to that, it becomes 800. Let's look at a couple more, for examples. What about, let's do 1,498. And let's just start out, how about this, to the nearest 1,000. The nearest 1,000, 1,498. First of all, what would be my two choices? If I'm counting by thousands, 1,498 falls between what? Two numbers when I'm counting by 1,000. If you're counting by 1,000, it'd be 0, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. What two numbers is it going to fall between, Kayleen?
1,000 and 2,000.
Exactly. 1,400 has to fall between 1,000 and 2,000. Now, which one is it closer to? And again, the only important number now that you need to look at is this one. None of these even matter because the 4 tells you 1,498. Which one is it going to be closer to, Noah?
1,000.
What's that?
1,000.
Right, 1,000. How do I know that? Because right in dead center in the middle is what? 1,500. And since this is smaller than that, it's going to be like right here. It's just a little bit closer to 1,000 than it is to 2,000. What about to the nearest 100? Now you got to think about something completely new. Now I'm counting by hundreds. Which one, if I were counting by hundreds, what two hundreds when you're counting by this would it have to fall between? It has to fall between what and what? What are my two choices for my answers? Madison, my two choices are,
100.
well, but you got to keep the 1 in front, so it's 1,400 and 1,500. Those are your two choices. And which one is it closer to? Caleb?
1,500.
Exactly, because 1,498 is right about here, if you think about it. So rounded to the nearest 100, this is 1,500. What about rounded to the nearest 10? I'm rounding that to the nearest 10. What are my two choices? If you look at what's in the tens place, my two choices are between what and what? If you're counting by tens, what twos are going to be? Brooke, what are my two choices with this if I'm counting by tens?
90.
Right, but you got to keep these over here. Okay, so it's got to be 1,490 or
1,500.
exactly 1,500. Those are your two choices when you're counting by tens. Remember, you got it is 90 and 100, but you have to keep the numbers to the left. And which one would it be closer to? Where would 1,498 be? Well, here's 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98. I guess that's a lot. Which one's it closer to, Alex?
This was 500. No, yeah, 1,500.
1,500. Notice I got the same answer for hundreds and tens. That can happen. They're both counting. When you count by hundreds and when you count by tens, you do run into the same numbers there. How about this? Let me give you a couple more just to try here. How about 431? Rounded to the nearest 100 would be what? Caitlin Stritzel?
400.
400. Rounded to the nearest 10 would be what, Taylor Ice? 430. What if I have 888? Round to the nearest 100, Julia? 900, round to the nearest 10, Maggie?
Or 90.
Yeah, but you gotta leave the number in front of it, 890.
800.
890, yeah, those are two different things here. What about 1,702? Rounded to the nearest 1,000, Sammy Bollinger?
1,700.
Rounded to the nearest 1,000,
Oh, 2,000.
2,000, rounded to the nearest 100. Right,
1,700.
1,000, rounded to the nearest 10, Madison? 1,700, rounded to the nearest 1. Kaylee?
1,700.
No, 1,702. 1,702. This is the ones place. When would you ever round to the nearest 1? If we had a decimal over here. We're not gonna go there, alright. Now, take out a blank piece of paper, please.